a Dr. Zhivago-like campus. It is actually sunny and beautiful outside, but bitterly cold. It's supposed to get down to negative 13 degrees today, wind chill factor, and we're going to have an Arctic blitz for the next several days. So all students received a warning yesterday to make sure that they dress appropriately. I hope they listen better than my kids do, and make sure that all their skin is covered well and they're layered for the next few days. But this leads to a sturdy character and hard work these cold days, and it is very sunny out, so we'll at least accept that blessing. I want to thank everybody who sent me very kind and warm wishes on my 60th birthday yesterday. For many of you who asked if I have bought my plots yet in Cedar Grove Cemetery here on campus, or those who want to know if I have pre-registered for Holy Cross Village yet, thank you for all those warm wishes. And I'm glad that you can enjoy in the old Baltimore Catechism that sin called morose delectation, when you take joy in somebody else's suffering. I feel as vibrant as ever and excited about this next decade. Actually, we're really pleased on campus that the vaccination clinics, the boosters for our students, faculty, and staff were really well received. We have exceeded the 90% rate of the 18,000 or so on campus that have received and registered their booster vaccinations. So the hope is in the coming weeks, we'll be able to lessen the mask requirement on campus. So that's really good news. Also, we're starting to see the positive number of COVID cases on campus are starting that downward trend, which is also giving us some hope on that front. So it's my distinct pleasure today to introduce to you somebody who is new to the Notre Dame family, but is going to be an incredibly important leader for our community, hopefully for many years to come. Her name is Suzanne Shanahan, and she is the Leo and Arlene Hawk Executive Director of the venerable Center for Social Concerns. The CSE, as many of you know, as the Center for Social Concern is often referred to, began roughly 40 years ago in the early 1980s. And it was certainly a very formative vehicle in my undergraduate years. And it was founded by the legendary Father Don McNeil. And now it's always been led by a priest, but now we have our first lay woman who is amazingly credentialed, as you'll hear, to come in and lead the Center for Social Concerns going forward. Suzanne comes to us from Duke University, where she was the Nan Cohen Director of the Keenan Institute for Ethics at Duke University, one of the leading ethics centers in the country, and named after the former president of Duke. This was placed in her charge, and she has been an academic leader at so many different and important levels. You'll hear a little bit more about at Duke for so many years. Her research focuses on the dignity and moral boundaries of refugees. Her focus has been in the Middle East, Eastern Africa, and in the United States. And she's also done significant work on restorative narratives of child sex trafficking survivors. So she has not shied away from some really tough issues. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Suzanne Shanahan.
Thanks, Lou. It's great to be with you today.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. Now, I had the privilege of being with you in your office just last week, and you've decorated it so beautifully. It feels so warm, and you bring in the colors of the many global experiences that you've shared. But I have to say that Geddes Hall is just a treasure on campus. I know that Father Ted Hesberg, who helped in the soliciting the gifts that were actually made to establish the hall. He would always say, looking down from his 13th floor perch in the library, that so many universities have classroom buildings and they have dining halls and they have dormitories, but few have in the center of campus a 5-story building that is beautifully constructed and adorned, that is focused exclusively on service to church and society, housed with the Center for Social Concerns principally and the McGrath Institute for Church Life. What's it been like to be in those buildings, in this hall for the last 4 months?
So I think it's actually extraordinary in thinking about how this space helps create a very important community here on campus. First of all, it's just a beautifully designed building, a really mission style internally. But I think the most extraordinary thing for me is when I walk in the doors, there are 2 public spaces, one to my right and one to my left. To the left, as you walk in the doors, is this most beautiful chapel, which gives the building a real sense of reverence. And to the right is a coffee house, which is a gathering place to build community. And both spaces together, I think, set the tone for something very special here on campus. And I think throughout the building, there are nooks for meetings and gatherings. It's a comfortable space. It's a warm space. And I'd say that the space for me has really represented what is so special about this community, both here at Notre Dame, but also the Center for Social Concerns, bringing together a real feeling of reverence simultaneously with a feeling of community. So yeah, it's something that makes me joyful every day as I walk in the door. I've really been asking people, can't we keep the doors open to the chapel 24 hours a day so we can have that feeling everywhere as we walk in.
That's fantastic. So, Suzanne, you grew up in the Boston area and you did your undergraduate work at Johns Hopkins. And tell us a little bit about those 4 years at Johns Hopkins and also in the Baltimore area. How did that shape your direction?
Yeah, so I was a person who I didn't think much about going to college until it was time to apply. I applied to one place rather late in the scheme. It was Johns Hopkins because I heard the name from someone and it sounded like a good idea. And so I applied to Hopkins not having been or really knew much about it. And so I arrived, first day of orientation in Baltimore. And I think there were several things I just loved about Johns Hopkins. I think at the time, Johns Hopkins was still very much a graduate school where undergraduates were a second thought.
Mhm.
And I actually loved that about it. It brought out the inner nerd in me.
Mhm.
I loved how we were challenged. I loved the idea we had a 24-hour library. I loved the idea that we didn't live in dorms. We lived in apartments in the community. And it really enabled me to feel like while I was a student at Johns Hopkins, I was first and foremost a member of the Baltimore community.
Mhm.
And it enabled me to start thinking about what it means to be a responsible member of a community, what that looks like, how to do that. And I think I would also say I had a set of pretty formative mentoring relationships during that time, both with a faculty member, but also with the law firm that I worked at for 4 years. I ended up somewhat serendipitously in need of a job, ended up in a downtown law firm, a family-owned firm that really became sort of a touchstone for me throughout my time at Hopkins. I worked in the library there. I was also a process server. So I would serve subpoenas around Baltimore, so I got to know the city really well that way. But it it was really something that I think is a formative moment. I think the other part of my Hopkins experience was I was able to study abroad for close to a year and a half in China, both in Nanjing and then in Beijing. And I think those sort of combination of experiences, living in a city abroad and then living in a city in Baltimore, I think really shaped the kinds of commitments that I have today. And I think it really encouraged me to be much more deliberative about the kind of person I want to be.
I mean, that's wonderful. I mean, none of that, knowing you, none of that surprises me and how formative that background was. But serving subpoenas, I mean,
Yes,
that had to be in Baltimore. And
yes.
nonetheless, I mean, there had to be some stories that have emerged from that. I mean, were there some scary moments?
Uh, I'm a person who, for whatever reason, I simply don't have the worry gene. So I think there probably were moments I should have been more concerned, more
Yeah,
worried, more scared.
yeah.
But honestly, I thought it was an adventure. I really appreciated sort of trying to figure out neighborhoods, trying to think about when I would be able to locate a particular person. And so really for me, it was a way to get to know the city. And I honestly had some hysterical conversations with people in that work.
Oh, I can
As you can imagine, people are generally not happy to receive a subpoena.
imagine.
And so you get a bit of blowback, but you also get some unusual candor, which I appreciated.
Right. So I guess it's not surprising doing a year and a half of your 4 undergraduate years abroad that you decide to go to Asia after graduation and engage in development work in service work. Can you tell us a little bit more about those experiences and how they further shaped you?
Yeah, so I originally went to Southeast Asia on a Watson Fellowship. It's a fellowship through IBM where students are given a lump sum of money, and the rules are basically don't come back for a year and study, in loose terms, a phenomenon. And I was very interested in overseas Chinese communities in Southeast Asia and started my work there, but really became very, very involved in a variety of international NGOs and more local NGOs that were working in women's development.
Mhm.
And I think, like lots of folks who are 22, I thought I had this great degree from Hopkins. I was going to go out in the world and be part of transformative change.
Yeah.
And I think there were a couple of things that happened along the way. One was that on my first day when I arrived in Jakarta, I had a book, and someone had dropped by my house who I had never met and said, "I heard you were going to Indonesia. I don't know you, but my family lives in Jakarta. Would you give them this book?"
Mm.
It's a book that is from a printing press that I have here. And my family is a set of bookbinders and printers. And so when you're in Jakarta, would you just mind doing this? And this was a time in Jakarta where there was no likelihood that if you had mailed it, it would ever arrive. So
Mhm.
I thought, okay, fine. And literally, I'm driving from the airport in a taxi, and we're in the neighborhood where these folks lived. And I said, oh, let me just stop here and I'll run in and give them the book. Well, I ran in, we had tea, we had dinner, and this is where I lived for several years.
Wow.
This really became my Indonesian family in extraordinary ways. And it was a household of about 32 people who were part of a very extended family. And so there's this incredible sort of engagement with communities in Indonesia. At the same time, I was doing development work around Indonesia, in South Asia, in places like Vietnam, Cambodia,
Mhm.
Thailand, so throughout that region. And
Would this have been during the time of the Suharto
yes,
dictatorship? It was. So
yeah.
this was a really dicey time and dangerous in some ways, that you were there.
Yeah, so I again, not being one to worry in
Mhm.
general. So I think, right, I had a sense of extraordinary safety because I was part of this family, and quite frankly, um, sort of really took me into their home and made me one of their children. And
Mhm.
so as I would walk throughout the city, people would know who I was because they had really sort of paved the way for me in certain ways. At one point, right, just a random crime, I had my purse stolen, uh, hundreds and hundreds of people mobilized to figure out who it was and have it returned. And it was that kind of care, which I think made it more comfortable for me. But I think the politics of it, and the politics of that moment in Indonesia were absolutely tricky.
Yeah.
Um, but it, as someone who, I guess I was like crazy idealistic,
Mhm.
and I really believed that people who did good work had to be good human beings.
Mhm.
And I suddenly realized in doing that work that there were many people working in communities, working for women's empowerment, who were really not good human beings in their day-to-day life. And in
Mhm.
particular, I worked with someone who was doing extraordinary work throughout the region for women and beat his wife on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And that sort of disjuncture, I just couldn't take,
Yeah.
honestly. And it really drove me away from that kind of community work for
Yeah.
more than a decade. And I went to graduate school, and I went to graduate school at Stanford saying, I am never going to work in a community again.
Mhm.
I want to sit and I want to write papers. I want to write, I can teach students, but I cannot do that work because I couldn't get my head around it. And I know that's crazy naive,
Mhm.
but that's me at 22, 23, 24.
Yeah, but that's a somber yet powerful lesson to learn that mission service is not a job type or geography.
Right.
It is a spirit in the way that you deal with others. So tell me, you come back, you choose to return to the States, and you get a PhD in sociology at Stanford.
Mhm.
So what are the questions based on your time and your work in Baltimore and then in Southeast Asia that you bring to your PhD work?
So I would really say this was in many ways sort of a break in my thinking, or given my current work, I think it was really a time out from that kind of work. I moved into much more historical work, looking at historical patterns emergent around clan networks, nation states, deep historical work. My favorite century is the 16th century, so lots and lots of archival work. Simultaneously was doing very quantitative work around predictive models around racial violence in the United States.
Okay,
And
just
so,
quickly tell me what interested you about the 16th century?
so I had read a novel. I think the title is something, it was basically about the plague. And
Mhm.
I became very enthralled with that early modern period, sort of the relationship between religious communities and secular communities, how they were forming family relations. I think, like, as I reflect on it, the kinds of concerns I have about structural inequality
Mhm.
in this moment were really captivating in that moment. Sort
Yeah,
of how did people reconcile that extreme inequality in their daily life?
yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
yeah,
Interesting. So my understanding is you not only got a PhD while at Stanford, but you met your then now husband
I
there,
did
and
indeed.
I understand that was that's an interesting story. I don't know it, but tell us how the two of you met.
So we actually met through mutual friends after 2 years of his advisor, his dissertation advisor, saying on a weekly basis, "You need to meet Bill Tobin. You have the same sense of humor. I think you would get along very well with Bill Tobin." And he had a network of friends who I would overlap with now and again. And they would consistently say, you need to meet Bill Tobin. He was at the time working on his dissertation research on Washington, D.C., so was not in California. And we met in a computer lab when those labs still existed back in the old ages. And we met on a Friday and were engaged by Sunday afternoon.
You're kidding me.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
courtship.
Very quick. And I would say, yeah, that he did two things that were magical to me. So the first one was we went and we had a conversation. He wanted to talk about phenomenology. And I thought we had a great conversation about phenomenology. And it was just fascinating and interesting. And he told me about his favorite book. And he referenced a quote from William James, which is one of my all-time favorites, about if you want to change your life, do it now and do it flamboyantly. And I thought, who else appreciates that quote? Because it was one that was always super meaningful to me. And the second thing he did was he made breakfast for my roommates. And he made the most spectacular blueberry pancakes a person has ever made. But more than that, he has this ability to make people feel loved, right? And so these were two Stanford graduate students, crazy, anxious human beings, and he instantly put them at ease and showed a care that I just couldn't resist. So, yep.
Wow, and it's been a love affair ever since.
Love affair ever since. Yep.
That's fantastic. What a great story. I hope the other males that are listening in are feeling as insecure as I am about the courtship and the doting nature of your husband. Is he still cooking? Does he still cook the blueberry pancakes?
Yeah, he makes the best pancakes. Anything in a frying pan is extraordinary. Yeah, I think. Yeah, what I love is he's a person who, yeah, takes great care in his relationships.
That's terrific. So you finish up your PhD at Stanford, and you decide to take your first teaching position, not at a U.S. Institute of Higher Education, but you go to University of College Dublin, UCD, where we send tons of our students every year from Notre Dame to go study abroad. And you're there for a couple of years. Tell us a little bit about your experience as a professor teaching in Dublin.
So I think it was in many ways, honestly, a very disorienting experience for a couple of reasons. So I took this position after my husband took a position at St. Patrick's College, Maynooth, which is now NUI Maynooth. And so this was a great opportunity for us, dual career family, to work in the same city. And UCD at that time was this massive, massive university. The sociology department had extraordinary numbers of students. And the first course I was asked to teach was a general methods class to first year students. It was a group of 650 students.
Wow.
And it was, I had an extraordinary education at Stanford. The one thing I never did was enter a classroom. So I had zero teaching experience. And so just walking into that room for, a good 3 months made me physically ill. And so it was really sort of teaching and learning how to do that on the fly. It was, especially then, a very different kind of structure and system.
Can I say a quick question? I want to ask you, have we gotten better at educating doctoral students, not just in their subject matter, but preparing them for the classroom?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. So I think that's one of the extraordinary things that has happened. I think I was trained at a time where it was, if you know your subject, throw them in the room and they'll be fine.
Yeah.
I think that in general, I would say much more deliberative thinking about pedagogy, how to interact with students, and how to practice that.
Mhm.
Um, it is an overwhelming experience to teach your first lecture class, whether it's 30 or it's 650. I
Yeah.
think the one advantage was now the 30 is no sweat.
Yeah. So tell us about your area of expertise. When and how do you get really focused on the refugee experience? And my understanding is you've spent extensive time in refugee camps and doing primary research. Where does that passion emerge? And also with childhood sex trafficking, and these are some heavy subjects that afflict this world in probably far more significant ways than most people imagine. Where does that come from, and how do you develop that, especially as you come back to Duke and begin to work as a faculty member there?
Yeah, so I'd say my first several years at Duke, I was focused much more in work that was consistent with my dissertation work. And it was really my first year at the Keenan Institute for Ethics. We had a visiting scholar with us, Fiona Terry, just an extraordinary woman who had recently published a book called The Paradox of Humanitarian Intervention. She was a visiting scholar with us at the time, and her work, having worked for many years with Doctors Without Borders, uh,
Mhm.
was trying to understand the kind of negative externalities around humanitarian work when you are a good person trying to do the right thing and something unanticipated happens.
Mhm.
Um, and quite frankly, she and I, as right two women of about the same age, kind of hit it off and just
Mhm.
became fast friends. We
Mhm.
had kids the same age, um, and we would chat frequently. And it was one day she popped into my office and she was talking about her weekend. And her husband at the time was working in Kathmandu, and he had been with a group of folks talking about various things in Nepal. And she said he heard about Bhutanese refugees in eastern Nepal. And I sort of laughed and said, "How can you be a refugee from heaven on earth?" And she said, "That's what I thought. He must be confused." She left, I left. And the very next day, she comes running into my office with the local newspaper, and it says, Bhutanese refugees are being resettled in Durham and in North Carolina.
Mhm.
And we kind of look at each other and say, this is an opportunity for us to do something together.
Mhm.
And our goal was to try to understand the implications of radical displacement on how people think about themselves,
Mhm.
how they think about what is right, true, just in the world, how it affects their well-being.
Mhm.
And this was a population who had been in refugee camps for about 20 years and was, in a pretty quick process, told, guess what? You're being resettled to the United States, Canada, Australia, and Britain. You're all
Mhm.
going. So get ready. And we wanted to think about what that would mean for those folks and how
Mhm.
that would impact them then in coming to the United States.
Mhm.
And I think this really snowballed into a set of projects where um, I think both in a scholarly way, but also in a human way, both I, my husband, my children, anybody I could get involved, really felt we needed to act as human beings because there were situations that were crazy, crazy challenging. So um, our first work was in Bhutanese camps in eastern Nepal, where there were really high rates of suicide following this announcement.
Mhm.
Um, and folks wanted to know why. And so the work was really around understanding how this kind of disruption was affecting people's mental health,
Mhm.
how that was going to make it more challenging for them when they arrived in the United States. Um, but I think the biggest impulse of it was, and I say this to lots of folks, I did something really arrogant. And that was, I was teaching a service learning class, and I said to the class, we should sponsor a Bhutanese refugee family, that this would be an extraordinary opportunity for us to both study refugee law and policy, but also understand the lived experience and the disjunctures between it. Sounds reasonable. But the family we ended up sponsoring as a class had the most catastrophic experience coming to the United States that I have ever heard. Sort of included everything from, sort of the mother being hospitalized, nearly losing a leg, right, being in intensive care for months, going home, and her son receiving third-degree burns, being hospitalized for weeks, her losing her children, her getting her children back. It was just a situation that I think I have extraordinary respect for U.S. policy toward refugees. We resettle more than any in the world. But the kinds of supports that we provide for many families are just limited, right? This was a single mother of 4, 28, had a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 1-year-old. She was illiterate and she was innumerate. She had never held currency. She had never been in a classroom. She had never had any form of employment. And so we have this sense, this is a land of opportunity, but how do we create mechanisms so that people can access that opportunity? Someone with her life experience and her lack of education, right, wasn't able to access that. And I think this led to, right, a day-to-day existence that was really painfully hard for them. And I think simultaneously, she was one of the most extraordinary women I've ever met. She is loving, she is funny, she is creative, always thinking about other people. And yet day-to-day life in coming to the United States is hard. And that as someone who walked with her in this journey, seeing what it is for someone who doesn't speak English, who is not white, who is not educated, how challenging it is for them to walk into a school and be heard when their children are having challenges, or even just to get them the free lunch that they're entitled to. And so for me, that was a real turning point.
And this is not a unique phenomenon. It gives me chills as I hear you tell the story, that because we're in many places in the country, including here in South Bend, the local Catholic parishes I know are hosting many of the new Afghan refugee families that are arriving this month, last month, this month. I know that St. Joe Parish, which was also founded by Father Soren and his staff by Holy Cross Priest, is bringing in a refugee family with 11 children and all different ages. And it is amazing to see how the community is rallying around to support them on so many different levels. So it was the lived experience that really kind of piqued your interest in the scholarship and research, it seems.
Yeah, and I think the work really proceeded in 2 tracks. So much of it, as you said, is field-based research. I do life story interviews with displaced persons and survivors of sex trafficking, and they are restorative narratives. They're completely open-ended. That give people space to describe their life in a way they would like to think about their life, which is different than sort of a narration of the horror in their life. We ask people about a typical day, the 7 most significant events, to describe their family, to describe their faith, to describe their health. And then if your life was a book, what would the title be? And this is research that I've always done with graduate students, other faculty and undergraduates in places around the world. And it gives us insight into how people think about their life and how they try to create a new life in a new place, how they try to find meaning when the terms of meaning are really different. And Yeah,
Let me ask you just a question. How widespread is childhood sex trafficking in the country? You hear about it a lot, but for most of us, we haven't seen it up close, unlike many other problems, or it's right beneath our eyes and we don't notice it, we don't recognize it. Is it much more prevalent than most people think? And where is it at its worst? What countries are?
yeah. So I would say that child sex trafficking is crazy prevalent because right. Child sex trafficking emerges mostly out of desperation. So
Mhm,
people who are trying to feed their families, house their families, and have no other alternative. I think
mhm,
in the context of the United States, like anywhere, estimates are crazy disparate. They're somewhere between 3,000 and 3 million.
mhm,
Most people say it's at least 3 million increasingly.
mhm.
Even in the context of the United States, what folks say is if you get 6 people in a room, one of them has been trafficked. And that's because people resort to whatever they can do to survive, and the
Mhm.
extent of structural inequality, poverty, food insecurity, homelessness in the United States is extreme. And as that increases, so too does sex trafficking.
Yeah, I could tell you that having worked at a homeless center for a little over 8 years, rare would be the case that you'd meet a homeless child that was not physically, sexually, and or emotionally abused.
Yep,
And it was much more the norm than the exception,
yep.
and which is terrible. But now at Duke, Suzanne, you were the executive director of the very highly acclaimed Keenan Institute for Ethics. You spearheaded the College of Arts and Sciences curricular reform. You directed Duke's civic engagement initiative called Duke Engage, which was spearheaded by a huge gift from Melinda Gates. And you also led the Duke Refugee Project. How did you balance all of this? And then you were also a chaired professor. You had a lot on your plate.
So I say that my personal philosophy is always say yes.
Mhm,
That as an interesting, cool, fun, exciting opportunity emerges, I have trouble saying no. So a lot of it was I like to say yes.
mhm,
In terms of balancing it, for me, the pieces really connected.
mhm,
So the kinds of work that I was doing with something like Duke Engage were ways that I was thinking about the curriculum, the kinds of research and pedagogy that we were combining in something like the Keenan Refugee Project were ways that I was trying to lead the Institute toward a way of being. So in my mind, they were all reinforcing and connected
mhm.
in some ways. But I also, I don't like to say no.
So how did we ever, and you were at Duke for how many years?
24.
24 years. How did we ever convince you to leave all of that and come to Notre Dame and lead the Center for Social Concerns?
So I think there are a couple of different streams that were happening in my time at Duke. One, um, I was working on a big cross-campus project on moral purpose.
Mhm,
And I was spending all day, every day, talking to faculty members, community members, students, staff about pursuing one's moral purpose, doing a whole lot of value coaching with other
mhm,
individuals. And so certainly I started to think about, well, what am I doing? What's most meaningful for me? Where do I want to proceed? And this was also happening during COVID, where I think all of us were doing a fair bit of discernment, trying to understand uh, what is the mark we want to leave in the world. And there was this, and I shared it with the staff here at the center last week. I came across this quote from a British poet, Philip Larkin, which was, and he's a fairly cynical poet, so it was a somewhat anomalous quote, which is essentially something to the effect of, all we leave in this world is love.
mhm,
And it was something that was just sort of in the back of my mind in thinking about the kind of work I do with communities, the kind of research I do, and how love intersects with that, what that means,
Mm.
the kind of impact that over my 24 years at Duke I had on students, I had on community members. And then across the transom, someone had forwarded, from Notre Dame, the announcement of the position.
Hmm.
And I was like, huh, that's really interesting. I knew about the center well. I knew that sort of a priest had always led the center.
Mhm.
It's a place I've always admired, and I kind of thought, huh, that's interesting, and I filed it away.
Mhm.
And it kind of bounced back in my inbox, and I took a closer look at it. And it was like one of those moments. I think it's like the moment with my husband and the pancakes
Mhm.
where I said, this is it.
Mhm.
Like this is me.
Mhm.
And this is where I think I can have the greatest impact in terms of student formation, in terms of community engagement, that I think this is right. I'd,
Mhm.
I'd also say the mission specificity of Notre Dame is crazy compelling.
Mhm.
That certainly Duke's campus, the centerpiece, is a chapel, but it's a secular community,
Mhm.
and that for me, doing this kind of work, my faith is front and center and shapes everything I do. But
Yeah.
that's not a conversation that one has with students at Duke in the same way,
Right.
unless it's a student who you're close to the student outside the classroom, you're close to the family, those sorts of things. But it's not a conversation you have in a classroom. And
That's hard to unlearn. What I've seen from a lot of academics that have been at secular institutions for many years, you don't talk about faith openly. You don't. That's just a road that you don't go down. It's not easy to transition and talk about the integration of faith and action.
no,
It's
it's not.
been for you so far.
So I have to be honest. It's right. It's awkward for me.
Yeah.
That right. We all develop a style of engagement over time, and I had a shtick for 24 years, and
Mhm.
so here I am in this community, and I feel like I'm right an English language learner.
Mhm.
To a certain extent, it doesn't sound quite right when I talk about it,
Yeah.
but it's like one of the most exhilarating opportunities. I
Mhm.
feel like, yeah, so much of my experience here since I arrived, not even 4 months ago, it's just been exhilarating, and I feel like what a gift and what an opportunity, and um, yeah, so I'm grateful for it, but yeah, I'm not conversant yet. I'm not fully comfortable, and
It takes time. I mean, I think it takes time, and I think a lot. Sometimes people that have only been at Notre Dame think that it comes immediately and it's natural or whatever. But if you've been conditioned otherwise for many years, it takes time to find out how to vocalize it
yep.
and to share it. So tell us about your first 4 months. I mean, I know it's a very short sample size, but how has the transition gone for you? And what has surprised you? What have been some things that you didn't expect that have emerged in that short period of time?
So I think the first thing is, um, right. People have referenced this notion of Notre Dame as the Catholic Disneyland,
Mhm.
and I kind of feel like that undersells what this is.
Mhm.
I am renting a place on East Angela I think about where my family will reside permanently, and so I have the privilege of walking to campus, and
Mhm.
I love to walk down Notre Dame Ave and kind of walk into campus. There is this extraordinary sense of grandeur and wonder that really wraps itself around you. And
Mhm.
I step onto campus, and that entire walk, I just have this incredible joyful feeling that I am surprised by and overwhelmed by every single time as I
Mhm.
walk down Notre Dame, with the main building in the background, that I can pop into the basilica anytime I want,
Mhm.
and right, and just be, uh, is it just feels wonderful and wondrous. So that has been really something that's been extraordinary. I think the other thing about, sort of people talked about how caring, how committed, how nice people were. Um, and I just didn't believe it. I come from the South. People are nice in the South.
Yeah.
People are nice in Ireland. I'm used to nice. There is a sense of care here that honestly have made a transition after 24 years doable. I just don't think it would have been doable otherwise. There has just been the generosity of spirit has been extraordinary. I think also, by reputation, I knew the CSC, I knew the CSC's work. What I didn't realize was the kind of legacy that I was stepping into, which feels so special, and the extent to which this is a group that is just crazy smart, crazy creative, crazy committed, in a way you don't get, I think, in a place like Duke that has a different ethos, that has a different confluence of commitments. And that has just been, I kind of think anything is possible because of that.
Have you had much exposure to the students yet? And will you teach ultimately and continue to conduct research? And if so, what kind of impressions have you had of the students to date?
So I haven't been teaching. I hope to teach next year. I've had little snippets of engagement with students as they're here for various events and gatherings here at the center. I've had some meetings with students. There are some siblings of students who I knew at Duke who found their way to me. Just crazy, crazy, crazy impressive. And I think there's, sort of at elite universities like a Duke or like a Notre Dame, right? They're smart. I think there's also this sense of, a devotion to this community that's different, and a generosity that I feel is different. And I say that as someone who is pathologically lost all the time. And I find it, right, it's a place where everybody's willing to help me figure out where I'm going. More importantly, most of them tend to walk me there. And I think it's just sort of bespeaks sort of a care that I have just loved. And I think really reflects on the mission, the ethos, but also this broader issue to commitment to this community and communities beyond this community.
So this may be a terribly unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So, what do you see as your vision? I know that that's going to take time for you to work with the team and the students to really build something in a more significant way. But at first blush, given the roughly 40 years of history of the Center for Social Concerns, what do you think you and the team can do to take that to the next level? Excuse me.
So I think that after 40 years, that the team has really developed sort of what I think of as a secret sauce that really focuses on notions of accompaniment in community that involves theological reflection. And sort of as we think about that student piece, I think that's really critical. For me, it's how do we amplify the opportunities for engagement and the different modalities of engagement? So we've really been working through the notion of a 4-year arc or a 4-year plus arc of opportunities for students to engage deeply in community, to engage deeply in questions of justice, starting with pre-matriculation opportunities through gateway courses, gateway community experiences, through a vocational discernment process, all the way really sort of starting before you get here and really into the future and beyond. So how do we take that and create new structures and opportunities for students, alumni, and community members to engage with us, spreading that sauce? I think it's also we have these really flagship programs. Certainly our summer service programs, both international and domestic, are one of them. How do we really make those opportunities, which are extraordinary, accessible to absolutely any student on this campus who might like to avail of it, right? That this is such a signature opportunity for Notre Dame, because I think it really speaks to the importance of encounter, how we have notions of faithful citizenship cultivated in our students, and it just seems like a great opportunity. So it's both sort of spreading the secret sauce, but also amplifying, growing, and intensifying some of the programs we have here. So I think that's the first space, and we're developing a notion of justice education and how students who leave, right, from experiences here at the CSC and at Notre Dame have a robust moral imagination, have a very strong sense of practical wisdom, and a resolute courage to engage in this world and make it a better place, so that human flourishing is an opportunity everybody has. And I think simultaneous to that, thinking about ways that the research dimensions can be integrated into this, and really thinking about how to bring students more into research. I think this was something that I absolutely loved in my experience previously. So how do we get students involved in research and develop a profile in research for the common good, focusing on migration, homelessness, poverty, labor? How do we address the social concerns of the day?
And I hope you'll add the refugee issue, which is certainly an area that you have great knowledge on. I just want to say in closing, Suzanne, first that I feel incredibly indebted to the Center for Social Concerns for the formative impact it's had on me, and also on my children who have participated in many of those programs that have really kind of shaped the way that I envision the world, and we have made career choices, life choices, and so much of it goes back to the Center for Social Concerns. Also, I think we're really privileged that we have in our founding DNA, a Holy Cross priest who said that this university someday is not only going to become one of the great universities in the land, but more importantly, one of the most powerful means for good in all of society. You have inherited in your leadership of the Center for Social Concerns what one might argue is the heart and soul of Notre Dame. It's about how can we transmit in the education, the formation of our students, a way that they can be citizens of the world and to make a difference, to make an impact, to lead holy lives, other-centered, God-centered lives. And that's a huge charge to be given. And I can't think of a better person to take that over. We feel really blessed that you chose to come here. And I know that you and the team are going to take the CSC to the next level, and you're both through the student formation and the research piece take things to higher levels. So thank you for joining the Notre Dame family. I hope everybody will have a chance to meet you as we get into this post-COVID era, and we can get you out to some of these Notre Dame clubs and speaking engagements. And people, when they're back on campus, I know they should feel free to kind of walk into Geddes Hall and meet you and your team and say hello to you. So thank you for this time, Suzanne.
Great. Well, thank you. And I just have to say how grateful and privileged I feel that you have all entrusted this extraordinary place in me. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. As we always do, let's invite everyone viewing today to close with us in a prayer to Our Lady. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Thank you all for being with us. Thank you again, Suzanne. Take care, God bless, and go Irish. And if you're anywhere near us, stay warm. Take care.